Hi, everybody. Welcome in. I'm going to give it just a minute or so for folks to join. But in the meantime, as I always say, let me know where you're calling in from. I'm in New York City. We have other Kilo team members in the chat from all around the world. So go ahead and drop your location in the chat, and we'll get started in just a minute. I'm seeing Tulsa, Colombia, Romania, Salt Lake, UK, Argentina. Got a global audience here today. Great. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds for folks to trickle in. I see some people still joining, and then we'll get going. All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm Brian. I'm a developer relations engineer here at Kilo Code. And today I'm really excited because we've got a guest. We're going to be doing more of a discussion format today, kind of like a fireside chat style, and about something that I personally care a lot about, and that's the command line, the terminal. So for a lot of developers, and sometimes myself included, the command line is home, right? It's a place where a ton of developers do the majority of their development. It's where a lot of real work happens. And I think the industry has sort of caught on to that, right? So some of the most popular AI coding tools right now are CLI first, and that's not a coincidence. Terminal developers want AI that meets them where they already are, not something that pulls them into a separate interface. So today I'm really excited because we're going to talk about the Kilo CLI, what it is, why it exists, and why we think it's actually one of the most powerful ways to do agentic engineering. And I'm not going to be doing this alone. I've got Marius here with me, who is one of our engineers here at Kilo, and he actually owns the CLI. So he's been deep in the weeds building this thing, and I think he's the perfect person to talk about why the command line matters in AI assisted development. So the agenda today is pretty simple. We're going to start with the conversation. I'm going to bring on Marius to ask some questions about the CLI, get the engineer's perspective. We'll talk about agentic engineering from the terminal and about where he sees this going. And then after that, we're going to jump into a little demo where I'll actually show you the CLI in action. We'll build something from scratch, and we'll show off a couple of the CLI features. Sound good? All right, let's get into it. So Marius, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, of course. So if anyone was here, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we did a little session on parallel agents in the IDE with Marius, which was great. And I'm excited to chat more about the CLI today. So the first question I have is, why does the CLI exist? Right? We have the VS Code extension, we have JetBrains, we have cloud agents in the browser, we have all these interfaces where you can access Kilo. Why do we feel like we needed a command line interface on top of all of that?
It's actually a fundamental question on like, okay, what product do you build in agentic coding, I guess, right?
Right.
And I think we are seeing a trend right now in the industry where you see developers moving more and more out of an actual editor, an actual code editor, and moving more into an era where they rather use a terminal and an agent in order to write software. And this is also why it makes sense to think about, okay, what is the interface where your agent runs? Like, is it a terminal or where it is? And a terminal has a couple of advantages. So one simple advantage is that most of what your agent actually sees in the IDE as well is the terminal, because it interacts with your environment, which is your code base, via the terminal. So you move to a much more native space where you're in the area of having a look, okay, what is my agent doing? Like, how is it interacting with my environment directly without abstractions? So a lot of people like this because you can see directly what happens in your changes. And second good argument for the CLI is actually that it starts in its own process. So it runs anywhere where you want to. You can literally SSH into systems with it. There's the possibility to run it eventually on your Android at some point. If you want to, you can run it on your Raspberry Pi. You can run it on multiple directories, multiple work trees. So the terminal itself is async in its nature by default, and it's kind of isolated in its own process if you just run it. So that makes it a very suitable candidate for parallel development as well, specifically if you go into more advanced stages of agentic coding.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So it's more accessible. It already supports a lot of the workflows that we need and use in the IDE and elsewhere. Makes a lot of sense. So, for people that haven't used the Kilo CLI yet, or maybe any CLI, could you just give us a quick overview? Like what actually is it? How do you install it? What's the basic experience like? And I can pull up my own terminal here and we can maybe walk through it together.
Sure, yeah. So the simplest way to start is actually maybe you can show it in the terminal.
Yeah.
So you can go to our doc site, and on the doc site, you'll see how to install Kilo code in the CLI. And in there, you can just run npm install globally. And then in the docs, you should find everything. Yeah, maybe we can even paste it into the chat. Yeah, from there, the only thing you got to do is open the terminal and then just paste Kilo code. Yeah, first installation. Yeah.
This will also update it, right? If someone's already installed.
Sure. Yeah.
There we go.
So, and then
Kilo.
Exactly, Kilo code, and then
there it is.
Exactly. So you see now the CLI, and that the nice thing about this is it actually uses the same core mechanism that the VS Code extension does. It might not expose all of the features that it has until now, but a large majority of the features is already in it, and it shares the same agentic core. So you can actually use Kilo code now everywhere without having to run VS Code somewhere, and which I find quite cool. So you can now choose the medium where you want to edit code. You can use it for anything. So maybe editing code is not the only thing you can do with the CLI. You can maybe start now connecting MCPs or using different CLIs, interact with different systems where you want to dig through data which you have locally on your device. So all of that is now open, and you can use it directly by just typing in the command.
Yeah, that's awesome. Can we maybe like walk through like the basic experience of using the CLI and maybe like some of the workflows or configuration options that people are used to in the IDE?
Yeah, so one basic workflow which you haven't shown because you have been logged in already is at the beginning you get prompted to log in with your provider. So you can choose, obviously, bring your own key as a provider like usual, as we are open in that direction for all model providers, but you can also choose Kilo code as a model provider. And then once you do this, you just start and you enter here. And then the CLI is built in such a way that you have on the bottom, you have a status bar that lets you know, are you in a work tree, are you in a branch, what mode do you have on the bottom right, what model have you selected, and on the very bottom right is also the context, and a couple of other things that show up in the UI when you want them. And the central input field is the actual text input field, which you see above. And similar as you maybe used from the VS Code extension or other applications, you can use slash commands. So you use a slash, and then with that slash, you're able to select different options, or maybe a different mode, a different model, and yeah.
Yeah, right. So it's all the customization and modularity that people are used to in the Kilo IDE. You can change your mode, you can change your model. You can use, orchestrator mode for agentic orchestration of subtasks across larger projects, and all from the command line. So moving on from the basics, and I'll show a more in-depth demo after. But when I think about my own workflow, I spend a lot of time in the terminal already, right? I'm running Git commands, spinning up dev servers, SSHing into things, and having to context switch to an IDE or a GUI to use AI feels like friction, honestly. So is that the kind of developer that we had in mind when building this?
Yeah, maybe. So I think a lot of folks that are similar, like that are already used to terminal experience or use the terminal a lot, they will most likely tend also to use the terminal a lot.
Right.
Whereas when you see a lot of people coming from VS Code or JetBrains IDEs, they're very often used to click buttons. So they run the application by running a button. But as I said at the beginning, I think one big thing of agentic coding is actually you align your workflow a little bit better with the native interface that your agent also uses.
Mhm.
And it's actually a good idea in general, because imagine, for instance, your agent will run and interact with your environment all via the terminal. So if you're not able to run your application via the terminal yourself, most likely your agent won't be able to do it as well, because it can't press the button for you eventually in the IDE. So it gives you a very good feeling and understanding what an agent can do or cannot do. So I don't think we necessarily target a specific direction of developers with this. I think it just gives you another possibility to move more closer and more native to the environment where the agent usually interacts with, I guess, right?
Right. Yeah. So, and I also think there's something about the terminal that just feels a little bit more direct. Like there's no abstraction between you and the development. It's just you and the computer. Do you think that changes how people interact with AI when they're using it from the CLI versus a visual interface?
Well, there's a lot of discussions and discrepancy about what is the best interface to interact with. And I think both sides make very good arguments. So one side for the terminal is most likely making the arguments that I'm doing, but I'm biased because I'm only working in the terminal most of the time.
Right.
So there's also the other side that usually goes in the direction that the interfaces you're interacting with should be having a nice UI, and we're not in the Stone Age anymore. And we're not going back to the an older century
Right.
which all started in the terminal. What we want to do instead is use and leverage the technology which we have right now. So we're seeing this reversal of UI trend that makes some people furious, and I understand why, because we're kind of getting rid of some nice UI, but I think we also have a lot of benefits from it.
Right. Totally. And I already touched on it, briefly earlier, but so Kilo has these 5 specialized agent modes. There's code, ask, debug, architect, and orchestrator. We showed how to switch between them in the CLI. But for orchestrator mode specifically, I think that's a really powerful tool for development. It's the one that can break down a complex task and delegate subtasks to the other models automatically. So maybe you'll say, build me a REST API with authentication, and orchestrator will create subtasks for architect to plan it out and then hand off to code mode to implement, maybe bring a debug if something goes wrong. Is that experience the same in the CLI, or how does that translate?
It's a good question, but I think ultimately where this will go in the CLI is probably different directions, and it will more move into independent sub-agents, where you can imagine that we'll run multiple instances of terminal agents in parallel next to each other, and one specific CLI will be able to make this happen. So that does take a couple of architectural changes under the hood, which we're currently preparing for and where we're going to. And the goal is to get there. So we have some kind of parallel agentic framework also in the CLI. What we have with orchestrator mode is specifically the advantage that you have a specific context for a specific agent and your specific prompt set in order to achieve what you want to achieve. And your orchestrator would be able to decide, okay, what type of prompting would I need for this task or this task, which doesn't necessarily be or is the same way, but I think we're getting in a similar direction. So yes, yes and no is the answer.
Right. Okay, makes sense. And then I think another workflow that's important is debugging. So we have debug mode, which is very visual in the IDE. When something goes wrong in the CLI, does the debugging workflow differ from using that mode in the IDE, or even beyond the mode? How is debugging different in the CLI?
To be honest, I haven't actually used the debug mode so much.
Okay.
So the way I debug a little bit different. So I think most of the I think it depends a little bit on the workflow, to be honest, because some developers have different workflows than others, and this will be highly opinionated. So maybe a mode makes it more simple for some, but some others will have different choices. So you might want to introduce specific logging and specific log levels, and then get your agent to run those applications or tests in order to understand, okay, what is the specific order or a series of logs that led you to your issue, and that requires a lot of working with, okay, what changes had the agent done, and like what logs can you maybe revert back in order to debug, understand an issue. But I'm curious, like, how do you use it? Have you used the debug mode, and how would you use it?
Yeah, I used it a lot in the IDE, especially for like some of the demos that we do for the webinars and whatnot. I did a webinar a couple weeks ago on debugging small problems quickly with Minimax M2, which was recently succeeded by Minimax M2.1, which is available on Kilo now, if anyone didn't know. So that was like a very visual, interactive experience for me, and that's mostly how I've used it in the IDE. I haven't used it too much in the CLI yet, but I would imagine that it would be for probably a slightly different use case. But yeah, another really important feature of the Kilo CLI is autonomous mode. So can you maybe explain what that is and why it matters? And then maybe I'll pull up my terminal and we can kind of show people how to use it.
Yeah, to shine a light a little bit on this, I think there are two modes which you introduced, or options that you can use with the CLI that may have their own functions. So first one is auto mode or autonomous mode, which is not directly intended to be used by the user always. It's more actually intended for workflows that run like autonomously, for instance, in a CI/CD, or you run it in a cloud agent, and then usually you don't want any user interaction at all. And this is where you can use auto mode, because it kind of like will everything what you do, but you also want to use it in a careful way. So usually you want to have it in sandboxed environments. You want to make sure and check that everything works. So it's kind of not as interactive as you would think as a user. And the second mode, which we introduced or was actually contributed by a user, is initially and then changed in specific directions, and was always already there in the VS Code extension, as far as understood, is the YOLO mode, which we call it. So, and the YOLO mode goes in the direction of you not having to approve every interaction that the CLI does. But I would probably be careful with it in its own, and do this step by step, because it also can cause a lot of harm. Like, imagine you started on a repository that has malicious code. There's a high risk of prompt injection. Things like this happen. So I would start with it once I'm confident on the task, what my agent does, because you kind of get the feel for it after a while where you should use agentic coding and why not.
Right. And just to show people like what exactly that would look like. So if you were outside of the CLI, you would type the Kilo command, you'd use the auto flag, and then you'd type your command. So it wouldn't always be you typing the command because, as Marius said, it's sometimes intended to be used in automated workflows. For example, we could say like Kilo auto, maybe improve the UI of this app and make it look more modern, something like that. Quote, you'd send that off, and then it would open the CLI with no input options, and it would run autonomously and complete the workflow for you there. I'm going to check I'm going to hop into the chat here and see if we have any questions. But you can see there it's loading up the task and going through autonomously.
And you also see or notice it doesn't actually have any input. So it's quite hard to steer as a user and literally in read-only mode, so to say, in the terminal itself. I think what you always can do if you open the Kilo Code CLI is just, I think it was Control Y or Command Y, which enables YOLO mode on the fly. Then you can have it run autonomously for whatever task you want. And if you want to revert back and go to actual permission mode again, which you configure actually in a config, then you press it again and it should be exactly there. You see it now.
Yeah, so on a
once
Mac,
you see YOLO there, then most of the permissions are, so to say, gone. So the agent can execute all commands without your approval.
Yeah, that's great. I personally use YOLO mode in like webinar demos if I'm vibe coding a fun example project. But as Marius mentioned, like it is probably someone in the comments said it's the purest version of vibe coding, and it's true. You should probably only use it if you really trust the AI, if it's in a safe environment, if you're not risking any security, if you don't have anything that you need secured or that could risk messing with production in any way.
A really bad example for using YOLO mode with the CLIs, for instance, a database migration. So doing a database migration with YOLO mode is never actually a good idea. Prompt injection, yes or no. You will end up inevitably, most likely, or at least the older models, they used to have no understanding of like, okay, if the data is gone, it's gone. So they usually delete your database very quickly and you end up with no data at all in production. So it's very wise to look into, okay, what type of security and safety do I have on a specific domain task? And then decide, okay, like, hey, how much supervision do I want to have here?
Right, makes sense. Yeah, so moving on from that, I'm pulling up the chat here to make sure we don't have any pressing questions.
I think we have one, which is the MCP.
Oh, yeah.
So the MCP is actually a bit complicated to set up right now. The best way to actually do it is most likely to ask Kilo Code with the documentation, which we just recently added in the repository. So in the docs, there will be some documentation that explains how to set up MCPs and how to set them up for the CLI and also how to set it up for the extension. And there will be a different file you have to set up on your machine. But the idea is in the future that you can all do this in the CLI directly without having to do this. A good way to verify is you'd actually restart the IDE and then go to the MCP extensions. And if you see there the MCP server running, most likely it will also work for the CLI. And you can actually use it even though it's not there on your eye level. And this is what I meant earlier. So a lot of features that we already have in the VS Code extension, they will be there already, but they're just not fully exposed in terms of the UI, but we get them step by step into the hands of the user in the terminal.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think we're coming up on time, and I want to do a quick demo. So I'm just going to ask a few more from you, Marius. With the one of them being, where do you see the CLI going? Like, what's on the roadmap? What are you working on, and what are you excited to build next?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like I'm actually a big CLI user and terminal user. So I think there's a couple of things we need to get right with the CLI, specifically stability, getting the product right, and making this a reliable tool. And this is on the roadmap for now. We're already starting with this, and we're also changing a couple of fundamental things to make development much quicker. Not only around the agentic core, but also about the CLI itself. So it's much more easier for contributors to contribute in our repository, but also, for instance, for development itself. So yeah, so I think there will be a lot of changes happening in direction of what I mentioned earlier, a couple of things, but also in the direction of how do we get users productive? So because most users that work in the terminal, they go to more advanced workflows very easily. They have multiple checkouts or work trees, work on different things at the same time. They might have advanced terminal commands they enter or run anyway. So this is where we're targeting. We want to have and build a reliable tool that you can use anywhere and makes you productive.
Yeah, awesome. And then I think the last question is really just open-ended. If there's anything else you want people to know about the CLI, or what's coming next, or how they should think about using it, or if you're looking for feedback or anything like that, just a last open question for you there.
Yeah, to be honest, I would just go ahead and try it first of all. So and then let us know everything what you find about the CLI, and we'll make it better. Feel free to input an issue, send it in our Discord channel, or whatever there is you want to have better, or even better, get in a PR, and we'll see what we can do in the direction where we get the product really good. And I think this is mostly what everybody to know, that we care about the CLI as well, and we want to move it in the direction where the community wants it. So yeah. And for this, we need the input of the community. So that's why I'm mentioning this.
Totally. And just real quick before we get into the demo, I'm going to throw up the the Reddit and Discord QRs. So those are two great places to give feedback on the CLI or anything else about Kilo. Our engineers and DevRel people are very active in both these channels. So we'd love to hear what you think once you try it. And then anything else you want to talk about, show off what you're building, etc. So, thanks a lot, Marius. I really appreciate the time. Got some great insights there. Feel free to jump off, and I'm going to do a quick demo of building something with the CLI. I know we're going over time, but I want to make sure I let everyone know how they can enter for those $50 of credits.
Thank you for having me. Wish everybody a nice day.
Thanks, Marius.
Bye.
All right. So I'm going to pull up, jump out of here, pull up the CLI. And we're going to do a quick demo. I know we're cutting it